As always, poskin b'chvod achsanya. I'll say open with being appreciative and giving kavod to the hosts. So in this case, not only we appreciate the Cohens for hosting us, but for pushing the shiur to happen, and for making it happen, and for doing all the arrangements, and for the breakfast and everything. So we appreciate it very much, Hannah. And very nice to see you all here. Yeah. Okay. Very nice to see you all here. So I'd like to talk about this. I thought about giving a shiur on a Sunday, so between Parshas Vayechi and Parshas Shmos. So it's like it's hard because to talk about Parshas Shmos, we didn't get there yet, and I haven't started really learning Parshas Shmos yet this year. And but to talk about Vayechi, so that's already like old news. You know what I mean? It's like from last Shabbos already. So I thought to speak about the time period, like the whole tkufa, the whole time period, the chunk of time of Vayechi and Shmos, meaning the whole story of Galus Mitzrayim is what I want to try to talk about, and try to pull out some ideas and some thoughts and some insight into the whole story of the going down to Mitzrayim, and what the Jews did in Mitzrayim and what they were really doing over there, and then the Geula and coming out of it. So I want to, but before I get into it, I just want to start with an idea like this. So a couple years ago, I gave an alumni shiur about the whole idea of metaphors and the power of metaphors, and how central to Torah Hashkafa and the world, just the way the world works. I think it was a Shalosh Shudas shiur in Elizabeth. I don't know if some of you were there, maybe not. I don't know, maybe not. Nobody was there. Okay, but some people were there. A lot of people were there, but I guess nobody's there that was here. So I want to try to talk about the story of Mitzrayim, but not only as it pertains to a description, a historical description of Klal Yisrael's experience in Mitzrayim, but more about, once we understand what was going on in Mitzrayim, to try to understand, what the metaphor is for us and how it applies in other areas of our lives. So I had a thought like this, that what I said in that shiur 2 years ago that none of you were there, is that what. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Say a lot of, yeah, that's a good idea. So what is a metaphor? What does the word mean? What is a metaphor? What does it mean? What does it mean? What is a metaphor? Something that represents something else. And the idea that I spoke about in that shiur was that the concept of a metaphor is not just like a nice literary tool. But the whole idea of metaphor is something that is really fundamental to Torah and Judaism. Now, what I mean by that is that the Torah, of course, is meant to be understood as a historical story and telling us information. But it's also a metaphor. It's also there to teach us lessons and to apply it in other places. It's also there to give us like an idea. And what I said in that shiur is really, if a person is really tuned into Ruchnius, so everything in the world is really a metaphor. Everything, the whole physical world, right, is really only a representative of something from the spiritual world, right? The spiritual world is really what's going on, right? There's a vast Ruchnius world that's out there, and we only experience, the table and the coffee and the Baruch Hashem, and all the things. Yeah, that's what we experience over here. But if a person leaves it at that, so they're really missing the point, right? Because the whole point of Olam Hazeh, the whole point of the world is not the table and the coffee. It's how to use that table and that coffee to approach Hashem. How to use that, whatever it is in this world, and how do I see that as a projection of godliness, and what does that mean to me, and what do I do with it? Right? That was okay. I don't want to go more into that here. That was the idea. So I just had the idea like this. Does anybody know what a fractal is? What's a fractal? Anybody know what this is in mathematics? A fractal geometry?
It's in this.
It's what?
It's in Frozen, the song Frozen Fractal.
We were all thinking it.
Okay, no. So did they tell you what it is from that song, or they didn't tell you? Okay. So what a fractal is? Okay, is like this. Okay, it's a little bit hard to explain. But okay, what a fractal is a self-repeating pattern that repeats itself infinitely, and it's a mathematical idea, but it really exists in nature. It exists in the world all around. Let's just take a tree, for example. Right? When you look at a tree, So what's a tree? A tree is a trunk, roots and a trunk, and then it has all sorts of branches branching out of it, right? Now, if you were to zoom in on a branch, right, so then other than scale, that branch is really a miniature of the tree, right? If you would break a branch of a tree and stick it in the ground, then that would also look like a tree. It would have, a trunk and pieces coming out of it. And then if you zoom in further on the branch and you take a smaller sub-branch of that branch with other branches and you would break that off, it would also look exactly like the tree. A picture of a barren tree, not with leaves to give you a size comparison. Right? You understand what I'm saying? The idea is that the idea of a fractal, the idea is that it's a relatively new mathematics. It's like only since the 70s that they you ever saw like these. Okay, so the idea is that this person he was a Jewish guy, of course. Benoit Mengelbrot was his name, and what he discovered was that this idea of fractals, this idea of being able to zoom in on something, and when you zoom in on it, you see the same thing as the big thing, just on a smaller scale, and then you zoom in deeper and you see. So he developed this mathematically. And if you think about it, there are many, many things in the world that really function this way. Think about mountains. That's actually really where it came from. It's very interesting. There was a guy who was hired to do graphics. This is again in the 70s, to do graphics, computer graphics of mountains for I forgot what airline was for an advertisement of a plane flying. And had a very hard time doing the mountains graphically because mountains are very, to make it look real, there has to be a lot of texture and a lot of detail and a lot of, you can't just do like a triangle and say that's a mountain, or 2 or 3 triangles and say that, So what he discovered when he was trying to do this, through computer graphics for advertising, advertising makes the world go round. What he discovered was that mountains also, exhibit fractal geometry, which means that if you want to make and this is all computer graphics nowadays are done this way. This was like a breakthrough in CGI and all graphic animation. Is that so many things in nature are the same pattern repeating itself on different scales. And what this guy did was he just programmed in the math of triangles and angles and got mountains, and got very, very realistic looking mountains, because the idea being that a mountain is made up of many other pieces that, again, if you zoom in, you can't tell that it's only a small part. If you zoom in more, you zoom in more. And what they further discovered is that this is something that's really, it's like ubiquitous in nature. It's really everywhere. Everywhere from EEG readings, in a person's heart, you don't want to talk about it like, that graph, but when you zoom in on that graph, also, and to any section that you zoom into, again, you're going to see, it's not like a steady thing. It's also, anyway, okay, I find I'm getting, but the idea is, this is a very, very important Torah concept. This idea of the concept of fractals, the concept of anything that you see in large scale is applicable, and not just applicable, but it's telling you the same thing on a smaller scale, and on a smaller scale, and on a smaller scale, and on a smaller scale. Right? So I want to discuss this idea. I'll just read you where Moshe Vali puts it. He uses a line. He says, he's talking about something, nothing to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim or anything like that. But he says, in order to really understand, anything in Torah, you have to understand ki ein beprat ela ma shebechlal. There is nothing in the prat, there is nothing in the individual, in the specific, that is not in the klal, that is not in the general. It's not talking about people, not talking about Klal Yisrael versus people only, although that's also true. But it's talking in life, in general, in Torah, ein b'prat ela ma shebechlal. There's a concept that, when nothing exists in a microcosm, no person's life exists in a microcosm, no Klal Yisrael's galus in any place exists in a microcosm. It is all representative and represented by bigger themes and bigger things that are going on in the Torah, that are going on in Klal Yisrael. And that's part of what I want to try to do today, is I want to look at, we'll call it the story arc of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and try to pick out, not Yetzias Mitzrayim, I'm saying the whole experience of Mitzrayim, and try to pick out, a few fundamental, points along the way, and what happened in those points, and then to try to use that as a way to not only understand what went on in Mitzrayim, but to understand, first of all, Klal Yisrael's experience in general, in Galus in general, the whole tahalich, the whole process of Klal Yisrael going through Galus, and what we're doing here in Galus, and what's going to be when we get out. And furthermore, not just in terms of Klal Yisrael and Galus, but in terms of an individual person. Right? We're going to see that the pattern of the story of Mitzrayim is really the pattern of a person's life also. And further, we're going to see even within a person's life, even within experiences that we have, ups and downs, and things like this, we're going to see further that the experience of Mitzrayim reflects itself in exactly the same dynamics, exactly the same thing that was going on in Mitzrayim. It goes on, again, not just with Klal Yisrael in our history, and not just in an individual person's life, their birth and their life and their death, but even within an individual person's life, ups and downs that we have are really all based on this pattern. There's one pattern of how things work, so to speak, and that's what I want to try to address, to try to take the story of Mitzrayim and to pull out of it these points that I want to try to focus in on. So let's try to get clear. What is the story arc, if you want to put it that way? What is the story arc of Mitzrayim? Well, the story of the Jews' experience of going down to Mitzrayim, of experiencing Mitzrayim, what they were doing there, and leaving. So I think there's like 4 or 5 steps. We'll see. Like one of the steps is I'm putting together. Step number 1 is the Yerida into Galus. Right? The step number 1 is when people. The first step is going down into Galus. And that's what happened in Parashas in Vayigash and Vayechi. That's when Yaakov Avinu and all the Jews that were alive at the time, they all go down into Galus, right, together. Yosef was there from before. They all go down. That's step number 1, is the going into Galus. So we have to examine what happened when Yaakov went down into Galus with them, what was going on over there. And again, to try to pull out of it for Klal Yisrael's experience and our experience, what we can pull from that. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is this is sometimes a step, sometimes not a step. We'll address it. But there was a period of tremendous prosperity for Klal Yisrael before they were enslaved. Right? That's what we see in these parshios. There was tremendous prosperity. Klal Yisrael, they flourished and they prospered, and they didn't have to worry about anything, and they had all the money that they needed, and they had everything that they needed. Right? That was already in Galus. It was already in Mitzrayim that they experienced this tremendous prosperity, this tremendous growth. Vayifru v'yirbu ma'od, it says in the parsha this week. Right? They grew tremendously, and they multiplied tremendously, and they were very successful. Right? So that's stage number 2. Right? They went down to Galus, then they had this experience. Number 3, right, is the tsar of Galus, the terrible suffering that Klal Yisrael had when they were in Mitzrayim. Right? After Yaakov died, and after the whole generation died, like what we see in this week's Parsha Shmos, and then the Shibud began, the enslaving of Klal Yisrael began, and there was hundreds of years of tremendous suffering of Klal Yisrael. And that also we have to understand what was really going on there. What was the meaning of that? Why did Hashem make it that there were babies that were thrown into the water, babies that were baked into bricks and put into walls? It's like very, very horrible things that went on over there. And we have to understand what was that all about? And again, to try to take that and expand it to understand or to zoom in to understand how that applies elsewhere. Then they davened, right? V'yizaku el Hashem v'tal shavasam, right? Next week's parsha, they davened to Hashem. And their tefillos went up to Hashem, and Hashem, heard what was going on. And then we have the Geula. Then we have the release from Mitzrayim and everything that took place over there, right? And Klal Yisrael went out in a completely different state than they had come in, right? They left in with hundreds of thousands of people and with all sorts of wealth and riches, right? Which we'll see in a second wasn't just physical, but spiritual wealth and riches as well. And that's the Geula. Okay, so this is, if we had to make, again, the storyline, it has these components to it. The going down into Galus, the period of prosperity, which we'll see that's not necessarily a given always, but it's an important one. We have the suffering, right? We have them davening. I'm kind of putting those together, the suffering and the davening. And then we have the Geula of Klal Yisrael coming out of Mitzrayim and becoming great. So I'm going to now go through this with respect to Mitzrayim itself and pull out a few ideas from each of these stages, of what was going on over there, and then I said, to try to apply it, in a more general way. Okay. So number 1, right, the Yerida to Mitzrayim. What was the story? Right, there was a tremendous famine in Canaan. Right, a tremendous famine, everywhere that the people were living at the time, and they were forced to go down, right, to go and get food from Mitzrayim. Now, it was a very joyful Yerida, right? It was a very joyful Yerida to Mitzrayim for Yaakov Avinu, right? He was going to be reunited with Yosef. Yosef was basically, the ruler of Mitzrayim and was able to take care of Klal Yisrael and take care of all of their needs. So they were not going down in suffering, right? They went down the Yerida into Mitzrayim was a Yerida that was done, so to speak, happily, but at the same time they were forced into it. They were forced into it. There was no choice there. There was no option there. Hashem, didn't give Yaakov different choices or options to do. There was, he says to Yaakov, I know you're going down to Mitzrayim, and I'm going to be with you, which we'll get to in a minute. But there was no choice there. There was no option. Yaakov Avinu was forced to go down there. So that's number one. That when Klal Yisrael goes into Galus, when there's a Galus that's imposed on Klal Yisrael, and again we'll apply it to the more specific soon. Yeah, but it's against our will. It's against our will. It's something that Hashem brings about for His purposes, for His needs, that He drags us into these situations, into the situation of Mitzrayim, a situation of Galus. Right? It's something that happens against our will. In fact, Chazal tell us, very famous Chazal, that Yaakov Avinu, he had a zchus that he was able to go down to Mitzrayim the way he did. Right? Chazal say, if not for this, he would have been brought down there in chains. Right? Yaakov Avinu, right? If not for the way that the story happened, if Yaakov didn't merit it, or if he had done, averas or who knows what, in other words, Mitzrayim was going to happen, no matter what. With Yosef, without Yosef, with a famine, without a famine, there would have been another way to have bring Yaakov down. He would have been kidnapped, or who knows what. This is what Chazal say. Yaakov was zocha to go into Galus with great pomp, with great, with all sorts of chariots and horses and all these things, with all this wealth and all this kavod. That was a big schus for him, but if not for that, he would have gone down anyway, and he would have gone down in chains. Right? That's what Chazal says. There's no escaping it. There's no escaping Galus. When Hashem needs a process to happen, when Hashem needs Klal Yisrael to go through an experience like Mitzrayim, right? So there's no escaping it. There's no way to stop it. Okay, that's number one. That's a very important point, and hopefully we'll see how this develops. The next step, right, after they went down to Mitzrayim, there was a period of tremendous prosperity, right, a period of tremendous wealth and tremendous success. And we'll see in a second that this success itself was somewhat of a double-edged sword. So I want to just bring out one point, about this, about what the experience of Klal Yisrael was when they first went down to Mitzrayim. Right? Which again, it was a galus. It was already a galus. From even though Yaakov Avinu was alive, and even though they were thriving, it's already galus. A lot of people don't realize this point. I spoke about this in school this year, Hanukkah time, that the galus Yavan was when we were in Israel, right? I was like, galus Mitzrayim, we were in Mitzrayim, and galus Bavel, we were sent to Bavel, and now we're in galus Edom, and we're all scattered among the lands of Edom. But Galus Yavan was a full-blown Galus, right? It's one of the four Galuyos, one of the four Shibudim, one of the four exiles of Klal Yisrael. But it happened when he had the Beis Hamikdash, right? Yavan and all the stuff that was going on of Galus Yavan took place while there was a Beis Hamikdash, while there were Karbanos going, while there were Kohanim, and while there was Avoda and all these things. And yet the Torah tells us we were still in a period of Galus, right? So we see that Galus doesn't necessarily mean a situation like we picture in Mitzrayim. Or the Holocaust. So it's not, Galus doesn't necessarily mean a situation of tremendous tsar and being downtrodden and tragedy. Right? There's an idea of being in Galus even when the Klal Yisrael are doing well. Right? Even in Bayis Sheni, right? Even Bayis Sheni was called Galus. So we see Yaakov Avinu, right, experienced Galus already, even though he was living well. So I want to say a point. There could be some of you who heard me speak about this before. Rav Tzadok, a Kohen of Lublin, as a beautiful idea about this first stage of the Galus. And he says that when in this week's parasha, Vayechi, it says, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shva esrei shana. He lived there for 17 years. The Medrash, he quotes a Medrash that says, it's a funny language to say Vayechi. Right? Why does it say he lived there in that way? Right? Chayim is like life, being alive. Why did it say Vayogar? Or Vayeshev, or some other language that would indicate that he was there and living there, but not like Vayechi and he lived, right? Living for Yaakov Avinu obviously doesn't mean that he was enjoying all the food in Mitzrayim and all these things. Living for Yaakov Avinu means that he was spiritually alive, that he was spiritually strong, right? So the Medrash says that these years were the best years of Yaakov Avinu's life. The last 17 years of Yaakov's life, when he was in Mitzrayim, right? He was with Yosef. He was with all the Shvatim. There was peace, among Klal Yisrael, who was around then. He was completely taken care of. He had all of his needs, cared for by Yosef, and he had nothing to worry about at all. That's what the Medrash says. By Yaakov, he lived. That's when he really lived. So Tzadok asked a question, and I remember I spoke about this one of the first years of the Poland trip, we actually went to Tzadok's kever. I don't know if I think we've had one time since then in Lublin. Anyone here there with me? I don't know. One time we went back there, but the first year that I went there, I remember I said this idea at his kever. It was like late at night, and it was very powerful for me at the time. He says the following idea. He said, "Why is it that Hashem made this experience of Yaakov be in Mitzrayim? Right? Yaakov's living, right? Yaakov reaching his spiritual apex, right? Yaakov reaching his the heights of his spirituality. So why would Hashem have made that be in Mitzrayim? Right? Wouldn't it have made more sense for Yaakov Avinu to enjoy those last 17 years in Israel, in Yerushalayim, with all the Kedusha and the Shekhinah and all these things, right? We know Mitzrayim was a terrible place. It was an evil place, and it was the Erva Sa'aretz. It was the lowest of the low, a tremendous depravity and all sorts of things. So why is it that Hashem brought about Yaakov's success in Mitzrayim as opposed to in Israel? Right, as opposed to where one would think, right? Everyone wants to go to Israel because that's where they think they can thrive. That's where they can, right? So why is it? So Tzadok says an unbelievable thing. He says because Hashem knew that Klal Yisrael is going to be spending many years, most of our existence in Galus. Right? Hashem knew this. He knows what's going to be, and He wanted two things. He wanted one for people not to say, no, Jews can only thrive in Israel. Jews can only thrive in Israel. Right? If I'm not in Israel, then I can't do it. If I'm not connected to the Shekhinah in Israel, then I can't make it. He says that's wrong. That's not true. Right? You see from Yaakov Avinu that even in Mitzrayim, which is worse than I don't know, I assume worse than Manhattan or San Francisco or anywhere else that I've been on this trip, but I assume. So that even over there, even in that terrible place with the billboards and the this and that, all these things that terrible places going on. But no, Hashem wanted to put into, well, again, one thing is to teach us that we can thrive, and number two, to put into the teva of Klal Yisrael, like to make it be that we inherit from Yaakov Avinu this ability, not only that we can, but through this we have the ability to thrive in Chutz La'aretz. That's what Tzadok says, a very powerful thing. That specifically Hashem made Yaakov Avinu reach his pinnacle in Mitzrayim in order, again, to show us and to give us that ability, to give us that power, to give us that koach, that even though we're living in Galus, outside of Israel, or again, even in Galus, in Israel, we're also in Galus, even in Galus, from the depths of Galus, even from there, that a Jew can thrive and that a Jew can reach his, the best that they can be. That's what we see from Yaakov going in, from Vayechi. Okay, so this is stage number 2. Stage number 2 is that there was, prosperity there. There was spiritual growth that took place over there. Yeah, Klal Yisrael was very strong at the time. Now, at the same time, some of Farshim say that this is partly what led to the Shibud. This is partly what led to the fact that we ended up in a situation of tzar. I saw this year. It's funny, on these trips I only have a couple svarim that I travel with. I can't bring a whole base medrash, although I have it on my phone. I have a lot more, but it's not comfortable to learn that way. So wherever I am in different places, I get I see different svarim in this role, different svarim in that role, different things. So I saw this year Kli Yakar that I don't recall ever having seen before. But he says an amazing thing. He says at the end of Parshas Vayigash, Vayigash, already two weeks ago, right? Before Vayechi is Vayigash. This is when Klal Yisrael go down to Mitzrayim, and it says there at the end, the very last pasuk. Yeah, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen, ve'yachzuva, vayifru, ve'yirbu ma'od. Right? The Klal Yisrael sat in Mitzrayim in the land of Goshen, and they took hold of it and they multiplied there tremendously. That's what the pasuk says. Listen to this Kli Yakar. It's an unbelievable thing. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Goshen. Look what he says here. Kol pasuk zeh ba'ashmas b'nei Yisrael hu medaber. This whole pasuk, this last pasuk of Parshat Vayigash, which until I saw this Kli Yakar, I thought it was a very nice pasuk. The Torah is telling us the Klal Yisrael went down there and they were successful and they were strong and they multiplied and these types of things. Yeah, they were doing very well over there. So listen what the Kli Yakar says. This whole pasuk is here only to badmouth Klal Yisrael, ba'ashmas, and asham is an aveira, right? It's only to point out the aveira, the asham of Klal Yisrael. Why? Because Hashem said, Ger yiyeh. What did he say to Avram Avinu? You're going to be a ger in Eretz Mitzrayim. You're going to be like a wanderer. You're not going to take up. You're not going to put roots over there. You're not going to be established over there and set up over there. You're going to be a ger. You're going to be a wanderer. A person who's temporarily living there. And they were striving to be a toshav. They wanted to settle over there. This is what he says. They were happy over there. They wanted to settle over there. They were happy with it's a nice place, Egypt. There was, like I said, everything was available for them. Maybe back in Canaan, they had to work very hard. They were shepherds and all these things. And over here, everything was taken care of for them. Yaakov, he says, just like we see by Yaakov in Parshas Vayeshev, it says Vayeshev Yaakov, Bikesh Leishev B'Shalva. What's the lashon of Vayeshev mean? That Yaakov wanted to relax. He wanted to, whatever that means. I'm not going to get into it now. Rabbi Yaakov wanted Shalva. He wanted, some peace. And again, Chazal criticize him for that. So he says, Kli Yakar says the same thing over here. The fact that the pasuk uses that word Vayeshev Yisrael, it means that they got too comfortable in their galus. They got too comfortable over there. And as he says, "Pasuk ma'ashimam al yeshiva zu shebikshu achuza be'eretz lo lahem." The pasuk is criticizing them because they wanted an achuza. They wanted what's the word for that? What are you saying? Like an achuza, like to grab onto something. It's all of these words means all the same thing. Like something that would be theirs, that they would be able to pass on. Something that would that they would have. That would be theirs. That's what he says. V'lo kach amru el Paro, and even to Paro, that's not what they said. They said lagur ba'aretz banu, right? To Paro, they said the right word. They said lagur. We came only to hang out over here for a little bit. Yeah. When they went down there, they were not intending to set roots over there and really set up shop and build Klal Yisrael over there. Ela lagur k'medayer be'daira. And now they wanted originally just to be there temporarily, but now they felt, no, this is the place for me. This is a good place. It's Kishmak here. And he says, so much so that until, even when Yetzias Mitzrayim happened, even after the Makos, we know 4/5 didn't want to leave, right? 4/5 were very, very happy living in Mitzrayim. They were very happy with the whole situation there, with the setup there, and what do I need to leave this place for? You see an unbelievable thing, right? The prosperity of Klal Yisrael in Galus, right? The prosperity that Klal Yisrael can have in Galus, right? Not physical, spiritual, in every which way. Yeah, but it's a double-edged sword. It's very dangerous for us. I saw something else just now on Shabbos. I was here for Shabbos, and at the Clifton Kollel, they have an excellent Svarim section. There are tons of Svarim that I don't see many other places. In fact, those of you who know that I am very into these Svarim of Rav Moshe David Vali, Zichrono Livracha, it was his yard site last week. Those of you, so I the first time I ever saw his farm were there in the Clifton Kollel. They have a great farm section over there. So I saw there they have a sefer from the Beis Yosef. It's around. I mean, I've seen it in other places, but it's not a very common sefer called Magid Meisharim. A sefer written by Rav Yosef Cairo called Magid Meisharim, and it's a somewhat interesting sefer because it's Divrei Torah on the parsha that the Beis Yosef, right, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, that he learned with a Magid, with an angel. Right, he had a chavrusa with an angel. And he would learn Torah with this angel, and the angel would teach him insights into the Torah, insights into the parsha, and he recorded a whole sefer, and he writes, not just like a nice idea. He says, on such and such a date, I was learning with the Magid, and he taught me this. On such and such a date, every paragraph starts with the date. Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Okay, I don't want to, whatever. Okay, I'm speaking to somebody this year who was very skeptical about these types of things, and okay, I don't want to get into it now. But the Beis Yosef, who we all, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, everybody holds from that, so he wrote the Sefer with the Magid, with this angel, called Magid Meisharim. So he wrote. I was just looking at it then on the parsha, and he says an amazing thing. Also, he says, why does it say Yaakov in Vayechi? It should say Vayechi Yisrael, right? Based on what I just said. That he reached his apex, he reached the pinnacle of his career, of his spiritual career, and he reached, he built himself up in Ruchnius as much as he could. So it should say Vayeshev Yisrael Be'eretz Mitzrayim, Shva Esrei Shana, right? Why does it say Vayeshev Yaakov? Right? Yisrael, we know, is a reference to Yisrael, Yaakov in his state of gadlus. Yaakov is a reference to the Ekev, right? Yaakov in his state of katnus. So why would it be that the Torah uses the word Yaakov here? It should say Yisrael. It was very interesting. I never saw it before. So he also says an amazing thing, which I certainly wouldn't be able to say this myself. Maybe the Beis Yosef wouldn't be able to say it himself if not for the fact that an angel told him. But he says it's a criticism of Yaakov. Never saw this before. He says it's a criticism of Yaakov. The Torah is referring to Yaakov as Yaakov here and not Yisrael because he became too comfortable. Hard to say. He says, but you'll tell me that he knew with prophecy that he had to go down there. And Hashem told him on the way down, I'm going down there, I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to take you out. Right? So he knew this was the state that he was going to be in. So what's the problem? What's the problem of being that he knew they were going to be there for hundreds of years? Right? He says, but he should have tried to get out. He should have done ishtadlus. Right? We don't just say, oh, Hashem said something and that's it, and I don't try, and that, if a person's in galus, of course it's the Ratzon Hashem. Of course it's Min HaShamayim. Of course Hashem is the one who set it up and put them there. But if it's bad for me, I have to do ishtadlus to get myself out of that situation. I can't be frum about my ishtadlus to help myself out, right? I can't be frum about it and say, oh, well, it's Ratzon Hashem, it's Ratzon Hashem, right? Like, girls, want to come back, Shana Bet, let's say, or who knows, like, all sorts of things. Yeah, and they'll ask one time, or they'll try one time, they'll say, no, it's Ratzon Hashem, it's Ratzon Hashem. It doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't. Maybe it is Ratzon Hashem, but still it's a person's responsibility to put in whatever hishtadlus they would need to do to better their situation. And Yaakov Avinu, who knew that it was better in Eretz Yisrael, and he knew the Kedusha was better in Eretz Yisrael, why didn't he leave? As he says, why didn't he leave? Why did he just stay down there? Why did he, why didn't he make any effort to leave? The famine ended, right? After 2 years, after Yaakov, the famine ended, he should have just picked up and left. Right? And of course Hashem wouldn't have let him. There's no question. Hashem would not have let him leave, right? The Gullus had to happen. Hashem was making it happen, right? But that's not Yaakov's business. Yaakov's business is to try to do what's best for him and for Klal Yisrael. So he should have, after the 2 years, after the famine ended, he should have said, "Thanks, Yosef. Write me often, and I'm going back. I'm going back to Eretz Yisrael." And the fact that, again, I would never say this on my own, but the fact that he didn't even try to do that, the fact that he made no effort to try to better his spiritual situation, which I guess would have been better if he went back to Eretz Yisrael. Even though that was Hashem's plan. So the Torah calls him Yaakov and not Yisrael, because there was a criticism here. There was a criticism of being too comfortable in the Golus over there. That's a very powerful idea. So that's number two. So stage number two of Golus Mitzrayim, right? Stage number two was Klal Yisrael thriving and prospering, and being too comfortable with it, and being too much of an achuzah, too much of a feeling of like, oh, this is my home. It's not so bad over here. This is the place. This is the place to be. Now, I know. Okay, so I'm going to pause here before I go on. I'm going to pause here, and I want to relate this now. I'm going to stop the story arc. We'll continue with the next. But I want to relate this now to just our Gullus in general. Klal Yisrael's Gullus in general. Right. So obviously we know we are all in Gullus, whether we're living in Israel or we're living in Chutz La'aretz. Right? We're in a state of Gullus right now. And this Gullus is imposed upon us, right? This is from Hashem. It's not our doing. It's not, Hashem is the one who put us into this state, and Hashem has a cheshbon, and He knows why He's doing it. And we're going to talk about that in Hashem, what that cheshbon could be and what it's about, etc. But this is where we are now. We are in Gullus against our will, right? We've been pushed down into this Gullus, right? But we're also in a situation nowadays, at least, that we are in this stage of Gullus, right? We're in the stage of Gullus where Klal Yisrael is prospering. Right? There's obviously ups and downs, and we all know the past 100 years have been tremendous downs. But for right now, our experience of Galus is far more similar to Vayechi Yaakov, right? And Vayeshev Yisrael, Be'eretz Goshen. It's much more similar to that than it is similar to the Shibud of Mitzrayim, right? The Shibud of Mitzrayim, the suffering and the terrible state of Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim and all this, that the Holocaust was similar to that, and other times in Klal Yisrael's history. Right? But where we are now, thank God, Baruch Hashem, and it should continue until the Geula Shlema comes. But where we are now, I think we see ourselves exactly at this stage of Gullus, that we are in Gullus, and we are prospering. Klal Yisrael in general is in a state. We have the ability to prosper, and it's very, very important to focus in on these messages, right? The messages again. So almost opposite messages. Number one, Vayechi, that we can do it. We can thrive over here in Gullus, right? And we have the ability to thrive in Gullus, and we have the ability to reach the best that we can be over here. But at the same time, we have to be making an effort to get out of it. And I don't mean making aliyah. I'm in Gullus just the same as you. Living in Israel is Gullus just the same. And we could be too comfortable living in Israel in the state of Gullus also. If a person is just happy, well, I don't see how anybody could really be happy with everything that's going on over there. But the idea is that when we're in Gullus, when we're in a state of Gullus, we're not supposed to be comfortable. We're not supposed to feel settled completely. We're not supposed to feel like this is our place, this is where we are, and this is where. And it's a frightening thing. It's a frightening thing because especially going through Klal Yisrael's history. Make a whole history lesson out of this now. I'm sure you've all heard this, many, many times. But all of our history is like this. All of Klal Yisrael's history goes through this cycle of being in a place of being too comfortable, right? And feeling like we fit in, and feeling like we belong, and feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be, this is where I should be, and this is where this is where I want to raise my family, and this is how I want to do all these things. And at the same time, again, we have to work on thriving, but we also have to realize this is not where we're supposed to be. And being too comfortable, but being too comfortable is what brings tsaros, right? Being too comfortable, so Hashem, so to speak, has to remind us, no, you folks, you're not redeemed yet. You are still in Galus. So this is one thing I wanted to pull out from our experience, just an understanding of what it means to be in Galus and be in a situation of Galus, even though we're thriving and even though we're doing well, and even though Baruch Hashem in general, Klal Yisrael has Parnasa and Klal Yisrael has yeshivas and we've got schools and we've got all these things. Yeah, but being too comfortable with that is very dangerous in and of itself. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on now with Mitzrayim. Okay, so what was number two that they were down there and thriving over there? Number three is the suffering, the shibud of Mitzrayim. Right? What happened was Havan is Chachmalan, this week's parsha. They say, these Jews are they're prospering too much. There's too many of them. Yeah, let's do something about it. And and they put them into the shibud. And we know that this the time that they were in shibud Mitzrayim was something awful. By now, everyone's seen that big fancy Haggadah with all the graphic pictures in it, which I think is a very chashuv thing, because I think I don't, even for me, I don't know if I ever thought about the Shibud Mitzrayim in as painful. You know what I'm talking about, right? Or it's a very powerful Haggadah, and it has very it has a lot of allusions to the Holocaust and these types of things to kind of give us a sense of what Klal Yisrael was going through over there. But the suffering of Klal Yisrael, which is mentioned just a few times in the parsha, we're talking about generations of suffering, people born into suffering, babies being born and brought up as slaves, and tremendous suffering that was going on in Klal Yisrael. And we know specifically when it came to the children, there was mass infanticide that was going on. There was mass murder of Jewish babies that was going on. They were having 6 babies at a time, and there were tens and tens of thousands. I don't think about this. How many babies must have been thrown into the Yar? Right? We only heard about Shifra and Pua, who saved them. They weren't the only 2 midwives for all of Klal Yisrael. There were millions of Jews at the time, right? When we left, we were 600,000, and that was 1/5 of all the people that were there. Right? We're talking about millions of people, millions of Jews having babies. There must have been hundreds of babies a day that were being thrown into the water. Right? It's like a horrible thing to think about. This was our experience. Klal Yisrael went through this. Babies being put into the bricks and being put into the walls. And he said it was a tremendous time of suffering, not to mention the physical labor, not to mention the beatings and the torture that they were exposed to with all those midrashim that are brought up in that in that Haggadah, etc. It was a time of tremendous suffering. I want to try to put some perspective on this also, to try to get an idea of why did this happen? What was going on? What did those babies do? Right? I mean, even though we know it's a story and it's Mitzrayim and it's in the Torah, right? But we still have to understand, Hashem was still doing it. Hashem was still killing little babies, on a mass scale. Those were real people with real parents and real, what was going on over there? Like what was the idea of what was happening in Mitzrayim? There's 2 ideas that this is a combination of a bunch of different sources. There's 2 ideas of what the process of Mitzrayim was, the crucible of Mitzrayim. There's two ideas of what was happening over there, and this is really the critical point that I want to get to, because this is something that affects us very deeply. Number 1, it was a cleansing process. Klal Yisrael, which I'll explain in a second. Klal Yisrael at that time was made up of I said millions of people. But there were a lot of neshamas that were there, that were being brought into that generation, that were in need of a tremendous tikkun, of a tremendous fixing, a rectification in Shemayim. Now, what is this talking about? The Torah tells us like this. This the Arizal explains the following. I've spoken about this in the past before. Could be you've heard me speak about this before, or other people. He says the following idea. This is what happened, right? That Adam Arishon, we know, right? He was supposed to be all of humanity, was embodied in Adam Arishon, and if he would have done things right, etc., right? So then everything would have been finished then and there, and we wouldn't be here today, or we would, but we would just be here today as part of Adam. But it didn't go right. It didn't go right, and Adam Arishon did the sin, and then he left Gan Eden, and then Cain killed Hevel, and Adam Arishon was porish from his wife, right? He was porish. He separated himself from his wife. for 170 years, something along those lines. I don't call 130 years, very long, 130 years. I think he separated himself from his wife. Chazal say that during that time period, during the time period that Adam Rishon was separated from his wife, there were millions of neshamos that were created that were brought into the world that needed to be fixed up. In other words, like those neshamos that should have been the people that were born to Adam and Chava during those 130 years that would have populated the world, right? Which again is really just all splinters, pieces of Adam Rishon's neshama himself, right? Whatever that means. Is with me? Okay, yeah. So all of those souls that should have been brought out during those times were not, right? And there were millions of souls that, or again, what this means exactly, obviously, I don't know. But the concept of it is an important concept to try to follow. There were millions of souls that were not mitukan. They weren't raised properly. There were millions of souls that came out during that time that were not mitukan. And he says like this, Arizal. He says that their first opportunity was in the Dor HaMabul. Right? They had an opportunity to fix it up during the Dor HaMabul. There were millions of people that were alive during the time of the Mabul. And those people had the opportunity to be good, right? But they weren't. They were wicked. They were evil. So Hashem wiped them out with water. They came back again, and they had another opportunity, and that was the Dor HaFlaga, right? The time of the Tower of Babel. And again, they had an opportunity then to fix themselves up and to recognize God and to to do what they were supposed to have done. And again, they didn't do it. And again, as Hashem killed them, turned them into monkeys, turned them into this, that, whatever happened, right? Hashem that's what I'm saying. Heard that? Yeah. Turn them into monkeys. Yeah. Evolution, it's like reverse evolution happened, not forward evolution. Yeah, that's some of them became monkeys, some of them became shadim, and some of them died. That's what I'll say. Yeah. So again, they had an opportunity to be fixed up. They had an opportunity to come and do what they were supposed to do over here in the world, but they missed that opportunity also. Right? All of those neshamos came back again during Mitzrayim. Right? All of those neshamos, all of those souls that had been, I don't know what it means, wandering around, bouncing around for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. All of those souls came into Mitzrayim, and that's why he says that's why they were destroyed with water and with bricks, because that was the Mabul and the Tower of Babel, right? The water was the Mabul, that was that generation's destruction, and the Tower of Babel was the same thing. It's the same words are used in the Psukim of Chemer v'Levenim, the same words that are used in Mitzrayim about what they had to make. It's the same words that they said by Bavel, let's make bricks and these types of things. This is all right. So the suffering that Klal Yisrael went through during that time period, and all the death, and all the babies, and all these things, it was a tremendous cleansing process. Okay, it was a process of removing, cleansing, purifying those souls that were not meant to be a part of Klal Yisrael as they were, right, in their unfixed up state. In order that when Klal Yisrael leaves Mitzrayim, right, they refer to Mitzrayim as the Kur HaBarzel. What's a Kur HaBarzel? A crucible. You smelt metal there, right? What does that do? It purifies it, right? Mitzrayim was a purification process. It was the process of purifying the neshamos of Klal Yisrael, getting them ready to be able to leave Mitzrayim and get the Torah. Right? Without that process, they couldn't have gone. Right? Without that process, Hashem imposed it upon them. They didn't have a choice this time, right? By the Dor HaMabul, they had the choice to have fixed it up if they wanted to, right? And they didn't. By the Dor HaFlaga, they had the choice to fix it up if they want. Hashem said, "Okay, enough with the choices. I'm doing it now. I'm cleaning house, literally, right?" And Hashem stepped in and cleaned out Klal Yisrael from all of these parts that really didn't belong, or didn't belong as they were, that needed to be fixed up. That's number one. Okay, is that okay? Okay, yeah.
Why was it Klal Yisrael though? Why wasn't it through Mitzrayim? It was also the original neshamos were all humanity.
Okay, very good. But in general, that's what you have to understand. So how can there be Jews and Goyim in general if there's only supposed to be in Adam, Harishon, right? But post Adam, and post Avram Avinu specifically, so Hashem said, it's Klal Yisrael who's going to be the people that are going to fulfill the mission of the world. And in order for us to be able to do that, we needed to be cleansed in this process. Right? But it's Klal Yisrael's job is to do that. But it's an interesting question, right? I'm saying what's going to be at the end of days when if everyone's going to get a tikkun, or just Klal Yisrael going to get a tikkun, but not for now. Okay, that's number one. It was a kur habarzel. It was a tziruf. It was a cleansing process that was taking place of getting rid or purifying all the pieces of Klal Yisrael, the bits of Klal Yisrael that weren't supposed to be there. Okay, and it was a critical process, right? Without it, we would not have been able to get the Torah. It wouldn't have, it would have just gone on, right? Like the door of Mabel, the door of Flagel, there would have been the door in Mitzrayim, and there would have been another door, and another, right? So Hashem said, I'm stepping in now, I'm making it happen, I'm taking care of it. There's another process that was going on in Mitzrayim. There's also something that's very important to understand in applying this to Golos and to our lives and things like that. There's another process that was going on, and that was the process of cleaning out Mitzrayim of any ruchnius, of any spirituality that was there. Right? In other words, we know that there's spirituality everywhere, right? From the times of Adam Rishon and onwards, like the whole world has ruchnius embedded in it all over the place, right? Like I said before, we have a physical world, we see tables, we see chairs and coffee, right? But we know that embedded in that is spirituality. There's ruchnius over there, right? And then when we make a bracha on something, so we are like zooming in on the spirituality, right? The Torah says, Ki lo ala lechem levado yichyeh ha'adam. We don't live on the bread. We live on the Dvar Hashem that's in the bread, right? There's a ruchnius piece that's in that bread that's giving us the sustenance that we need, the nourishment that we need. Everywhere in the world there is physicality and spirituality mixed together, right? Nitzotzot, sparks, if you want to call it that, right? Of ruchnius, of spirituality exist everywhere. So when Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the pasuk says, "Vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim." What does that mean? Does anybody know what it means? They cleared them out. They cleared out Mitzrayim. V'yinatzlu Yisrael asam. They cleared out Mitzrayim. When the story goes, they borrowed the gold and their silver and all their nice clothing and all their things, and they cleared it out. Right? They cleared it out. But what was really going on over there? What was really the thing? So I'll tell you a quick story. This past summer, my family, it was the first time we ever left Israel as a family. Most of my kids never left until the summer. So we went to London for a wedding. The whole long story. We went to London for a wedding this summer. We were flown in, my family. And on the way home, it was very nice. We stayed at Ariel Forecast House from the Alumnae and Ariel Azulai. And we on the way home, we had a stopover in Copenhagen, Denmark. We had a stopover. And on our flight from Copenhagen to Tel Aviv, it was on a Friday morning, early Friday morning. We figured we'd make it in time because we were leaving, it was like a 6 a.m. flight, 5 a.m. flight, I don't remember what it was, from Copenhagen. And halfway through the flight, literally 2 hours into the flight, I heard something I've never heard before and nothing you ever want to hear. But a guy, a steward came on the thing and says,